Using the teachings of Carl Jung as opposed to the traditional Freudian approach to how we think about our life's journey, today I will share a framework to build an authentic life from our true soul's blueprint. I am presenting to you today as a survivor of the trauma of life as a black man in the conservative American South. In 2021, we find ourselves in a continuing social and political quagmire that gets worse each day that goes by. I also speak to you today as a community health advocate working with individuals who are managing a pandemic of chronic illnesses. We are in a period of disruption. There is chaos all around us. But just because our external lives are in disarray doesn't mean that our individual lives have to be. I have found that a peaceful and authentic life can emerge when all of the internal debris of the disruption or the event that sends one's life into chaos has been cleared. In this presentation, I demonstrate how a Jungian practice of inner work can be adopted by anyone who has experienced a life of disruption, first to regain one's health and wellness, and then to find one's authentic life. Although disruption disturbs our way of thinking, it also gives us the opportunity to create new neural pathways and see life from a healthier perspective. Wholeness is a reality waiting for us, and it is within our reach. My journey is the story of a black American overachiever. Although I've been trained as an electrical engineer and a civil rights attorney, I am most publicly known as an artist. What nobody knew until I published a book, The Hero's Journey, Deliver Yourself from Evil, earlier this year, is that I used my performances as a way of getting energy. This pattern derived from a control drama I created as a middle child in order to make up for the attention and energy I missed at home. It wasn't until recently that I realized that I was living by a bad plan and I had traded my authentic life for a never-ending quest for significance in my attempt to please others. I am now a man on a mission to dismantle all barriers to health and wellness. I run a business consulting practice here in Madison, Alabama, that helps entrepreneurs and civic leaders use their principles of conscience to build healthy community brands from authentic lives in a way that the marketplace will celebrate and reward. Anyone who would dare to apply the 5 principles of inner work I discuss in my book, The Hero's Journey, will get more out of life than they ever anticipated. If you are anything like I was, you are in an island, a one-man show, a good all-by-yourself type of person. However, in my book, The Hero's Journey, Deliver Yourself from Evil, I describe my practice of inner work that can do for you what it's done for me. It might also help you realize that you cannot move the way you want to move in isolation. You're not wired for it. Someone who follows these practices will soon realize that we were not meant to live separately from everyone else. We are all connected, inherently and eternally. Now, I will not just say that you will have more joy, although truer words could not be spoken. You will have something even deeper than joy. You will have more you. Do you know what I mean? There will be more of you in everything. You will be more present. You will introduce yourself and engage with others with a true interest to discover similarities. Every day and in every experience, you will search for gems, and you will be pleased to find them everywhere you dare to look. Now, let's start the journey. This is my family home. I'm the middle child of 3, and I'm the apple of my father's eye. Because I have to be. I learned to do anything I can to be seen, heard, regarded, and accepted for all that I am. This is usually a difficult task for any middle child, but especially for me. Both of my parents grew up working in the field as sharecroppers. If you were black in Alabama 30 years before the civil rights movement took off, that's what you did. There was never much of a city here in Alabama. It was all farmland. That is, until the federal government decided to build Redstone Arsenal on their land. Hundreds of black families, including my dad's, were kicked off the property and forced to go make a living elsewhere. But I think somewhere in my dad's consciousness, he decided that that would not be the last time that land saw him. Only problem is, in order for him to have a job on Redstone Arsenal as anything other than custodial staff at the time, you had to have a degree in engineering. Well, the land-grant university we have in Huntsville only recently started its engineering program. If you want to study engineering in Huntsville, you've got to go to the University of Alabama in Huntsville. Well, although Kennedy is president in 1963, when my dad wanted to get his engineering degree, guess who's governor of Alabama? Here's a hint. Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. George Wallace. With Kennedy's help, my dad does the unthinkable and becomes the integrator. For me, the integrator's son, the goal of being seen or heard is not easily accomplished, but I spend my entire youth trying. And I thought I'd found my happy place until he passed away in 2016. And that's how I fell into my disruption. My life went from order to chaos. When my dad passed, I tried to keep myself busy until my body literally broke down. And when I was lying on my deathbed, I had to make a decision. Either I was building a lifeboat and escaping my old life and identity, or I was going down with the ship. It's a good thing for me that my breakthrough happened when it did. Otherwise, I don't think I would have survived this pandemic. Many of my friends have not been so lucky, and I'm afraid of what the next few months or years may bring. So I've decided to dedicate myself to sharing my story in the hope that someone else can find a healthy life, an authentic life, before they run out of time, like I almost did. So now, the framework. The unsung hero of this presentation is the unconscious. You've heard about this aspect of humanity largely because of the work of Sigmund Freud. And although Freud's work is considered to be the beginning of this conversation, it is Carl Jung, his one-time mentee, that really takes our understanding of the unconscious from the introductory level to maturity, which is where I hope we land today. Both of these psychological icons noticed as they were interviewing and analyzing hundreds of patients that there were commonalities in their dreams. Freud focused on dream experiences that he attributed to repressed memories, but Jung saw something more. Although Freud believed that often it was through dreams that a person could discover some emotion he had previously repressed or a desire he had forgotten about, Jung discovered that through the unconscious, a person could dream from a deeper place, a place that he'd never been or even had any personal prior experience of. And this is where our stars began to align. Jung believed that with our humanity, imprinted on our DNA is a cosmic blueprint of possibilities and energies that we are not conscious of. He calls this the collective unconscious. Jung notices that throughout human history, different cultures from parts of the world that have not touched have this same blueprint. So when a person is born into this world, he inherits a collective unconsciousness that is shared through time and space, even millennia. Jung believed that dreams are the best way to connect with this one's collective unconscious, but not the only way. Jung uses this discovery as he began investigating different cultural traditions, mythologies, and religions. He notices that although each presents variations on a theme, the characters, the plots, and the energies are the same in almost all of them. So whereas Freud, his mentor, found patients in inappropriate relationships with their mothers and fathers, and he would see their plight through a mythological lens of Oedipus, he would believe that that was the example of the universal myth that explains all of human experience. This pattern is still being used by Freudian psychoanalysts today. But Jung, on the other hand, he disagreed with this ideology. He says that this was an out-of-balance relationship with one's mother and father. It was not a universal myth, but rather the failed version of the true hero myth, an example of which he finds in mythologies like the Fisher King, or even fairy tales like Cinderella. What exactly should happen in the hero narrative is the journey of the healthier self, where instead of falling in love with a controlling divine feminine figure, as Oedipus does, the hero story requires that the conflict be fought and the battle be won. Jung describes this hero's journey as a process of first identifying and then facing your conflicts instead of succumbing to them. Here is where one begins a process of internal integration of the various personalities and potentialities of the self, which he calls individuation. In order to explain individuation, Jung spends much of his scholarship outlining the various aspects of the self that exist inside the core of every human soul. Jung discovered that we remain largely unaware of our many varied energetic personalities because we are governed by our obnoxious self, the ego. Here is another concept with which many of us have become familiar. Whereas most people think the ego and the self are one, actually the ego is like a press agent of the self. And often the ego has no idea who the self even is. Much less often does the ego have any idea what the self actually wants. And that is a conflict. Jung believes that because of the pace, the activity, the never-ending pursuit of material success and wealth, the only way souls in the Western culture can get beyond the ego into a true understanding and integration of the completed self is by adopting a practice of inner work. Dreams, imaginations, rituals, sacred ceremonies are all examples of how we can quiet our ego-driven consciousness and connect with a silent but often inflamed unconscious self. This is the work that we refer to in this presentation as inner work, and the completed process is individuation. This completed process will result in a life transformation only after we have found the courage to confront our conflicts daily through inner work. Only then will we be able to discover them and integrate them. Again, this completed work is called individuation. Here's what inner work looks like. The very first step in the practice of inner work that will result in the authentic self is facing one's internal conflicts. Often, one becomes aware of internal conflicts gradually over time. They start very quietly, whether you're talking about a sleepless night or a general apathetic feeling or a loss for the zeal of life. When the unconscious begins to signal you, you will find that it has information that your ego does not have, but that you need to pay attention to in order to avoid the chaos of disruption. You can often miss the message from deep within you, which I refer to as body energy. When I found myself in the hospital in 2016, grieving the loss of my father, I decided that I had to survive this disruptive experience. Although it devastated me and turned my values and beliefs upside down, I chose to do the work of deconstructing my identity and the energies that inform it through inner work, so that I wouldn't go down with the ship in a failed hero story. For me, inner work required that I must first investigate the source of my old paradigm. I had to find out, where did these values and principles come from that were crashing underneath me? Were they mine? Or were they my dad's? Or did they go even deeper into my personal unconscious, or even deeper into the collective unconscious, the blueprint at the core of my existence? These were the hard questions that took me to places I had never been or ever thought I'd go. And one of the quotes of my favorite writers helped me find the courage to do this work. James Baldwin famously said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." So I had to begin at my start, back to Genesis. That's where I developed my sense of personal value. This is the origin of my code of behavior that created my public persona. The version of myself that I was most proud of was informed by this narrative. As the son of a Baptist pastor, I underwent meticulous instruction on Genesis as a kid. But what I soon discovered was this mythology at a certain point no longer served my personal development and even began stunting my growth. James Baldwin helped me find out that my attachment to the creation story held me captive. That is, until recently. The stories of Genesis had done so much for me as a kid. This told me that I was not an accident, that in fact I was planned before the foundation of the earth, that I was created from a blueprint that God had in mind when he said in the beginning, "Let there be," and there was. Even the fact that I refer to God as a personal being and a heavenly Father is a part of my Genesis construct. Now in my investigation, I'm paying more attention to the part where God refers to himself in the plural, as he is reported to have said, "Let us make man in our image." That plurality of God said something that I needed to hear and needed to come back to. And then that image of God suggested that even before I was born, there was information in my DNA that was divine. It was perfect. It was balanced. It was healthy and it was whole. How do I know that? Because according to the story, God says it was good. But what is good? What does that even mean? And then I got to jump ahead to the conflict that I was taught results in the fall of all humanity. Adam has to believe what he was told about himself and to be satisfied with what God said he was. Or he could take his chances by initiating a journey of discovery on his own, a journey of possibility, of adventure, of high risk and high reward that Jung refers to as the hero's journey. The journey of consciousness where we realize, not by faith, but by experience, who we actually are and what our authentic lives can be. Wait a minute. I'm reading back versions into this myth. Revisions almost. But can you do that? Can I update the myth to serve my new purposes? Or is it locked? Is it somehow sacred and incorruptible? According to Jung, that's how our myths develop. The storyline changes with the agenda of the storyteller. Likewise, slavery wasn't born of racism. Racism was born of slavery. The storyline changes with the agenda of the storyteller. So you often can't even discern what the original storyline even was because the moral of the story is in the mouth of the storyteller. So did this explain my breakdown? Did a cultural corruption of the original creation myth allow me to be unaware of my potential? This investigation of Genesis led me to explore my awareness of my DNA blueprint, the place where my unconscious energy impulses were coming from. There, I discovered that most of my conflicts emerged from my attempts to suppress any aspect of my personality that reminded me of Adam and his failure to trust his authority. My dad stood in the place of God when I was a kid and basically taught me to see Adam's storyline as another failed human hero story. I should instead model my behavior in a successful way that would never have caused humanity to be kicked out of the Garden of Eden in the first place. So through this kind of inner work, I'm discovering that consciousness requires confrontation. If as a kid I was told to do something, my first reaction was, why not? Or why? And at some point the answer, because I said so, lost its influence. But by that point, I was indoctrinated. One of my new friends, Christopher Wallace, says that my reading of Genesis was skewed from the beginning. He says the question is not whether Adam is going to try the apple. The only question is, how long will he wait? My dad reinforced this standard of behavior by sending me to Christian school and exposing me to all of the Judeo-Christian doctrine that basically explained that if I wanted to spend eternity with God and escape the punishment of evil in my life, I'd have to conform my behavior away from Adam and more like the successful heroes in the Bible. But who were they? Jung sees this pattern throughout humanity and throughout every culture, but he posits that instead of culture being informed by religion and mythology, he finds that often it is religion and mythology that is informed by culture. That if, in fact, a dominating imperialistic society wants their subjects to assimilate and become easy to rule, the first thing they do is systematically destroy their identities by completely separating them from their ancestral connections, stripping away their heritage, and giving them new land, new language, new culture, new gods, new religion. Jung believes, however, that even in the most despicable examples in history, there remains a connection between the land and their people. That even when the language, music, and culture are removed, there is a hidden place within which the blueprint can never be erased. He notices that underneath the most developed cultures on the planet, there is always buried an indigenous culture that fights to remain untainted from the colonial wave. Robert Johnson also helped me realize this, that the one thing I appreciate more about my life experience the older I get is my time with my family actually being together in church. It was magical. It was literally like a community of spirits, old and new. I didn't even realize it at the time, but that's what I think we were doing. Connecting our conscious lives with our collective unconscious, repairing the damage and healing from the trauma by tapping into invisible energy, still potent, even across dimensions of space and time.